welcome to today's episode of Talking Legal with TEMPLARS from Accra, Ghana. My name is Daniel Akuoko Darkwah Jr., an associate with the Disputes Resolution Practice Group, and today I'm here with Paa Kwame Larbi Asare, a senior associate in the Disputes Resolution Practice Group. Welcome, Paa.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Today we are going to be talking about regulator engagement in the financial markets. Now, for many businesses, dealing with the regulator comes with a lot of anxiety and fear because they worry that, look, if I engage with them, I might end up losing my licenses or being penalized by the regulator. But I think that this is a very limiting perspective, and that with the right approach, businesses and companies can proactively and productively engage with the regulator so that they can together build a stable financial markets. So this is what we're going to talk about today, and I'm excited to learn about your insights on this topic.
Let's get into it.
Let's dive in. So before we start, what are the key regulators in the financial markets in Ghana?
Right. So there are a few regulators that we need to have in mind. First, we start with the Bank of Ghana, regulating financial institution banks, and then deposit-taking institutions. Then we have the Securities and Exchange Commission. You have the Financial Intelligence Center. You have National Insurance Commission, and then the National Pensions Regulatory Authority. So these institutions are the main, regulators we are thinking about. But just to touch on what you started with when you were talking about perspective. So for the regulators, you're looking at, they're trying to help the sort of grow the markets. And then they're also looking at protecting the markets, right? So those are the sort of the mindsets or the ideals of the regulators. So when you're a business coming in, once you understand that, it should influence how you communicate and deal with regulators.
Right. So as a business entering into the financial markets, how can I start engaging with the regulators?
Right. So the first thing starts obviously from, your planning stages, your business plan, having a proper structure, proper plan in place. So that means you need to have the right team advising you. That's where we come in as legal advisors. And then you also have the financial advisors. You have the entire structure set up properly, because that is what you're going to present to the regulators to say, look, guys, this is what I want to do. This is me trying to get into the market. These are the services I want to offer. Now, at the same time, flowing from that, getting your team to advise you, you also need to have an effective communication strategy. Too many times, you have people who are very wary of dealing with regulators. And what typically happens then is that they miss out without giving the right missing on compliance requirements. And then they have themselves in an investigation. So a great communication strategy and getting your right advisors backing you.
Right. So are there any examples of successful collaboration between the regulators in the financial markets and businesses or companies?
Oh, yes. So we have the good news, we have the bad news. So let's start with the bad news. And then we wound up with, some good news. So then the bad news is start with the Men's Gold saga. Now, this happened a few years ago in Ghana. Anyone who's heard about Men's Gold knows. They started out as, with the license from the Minerals Commission to trade gold and then to export. And then they ended up, giving sort of investments. You buy gold and then you get returns, astronomical returns that was beating anything that the banks or the financial houses were offering. And the Bank of Ghana initially stepped in to say, look, you cannot have the name Men's Bank, because that's how they started. And then later the Securities and Exchange Commission came in. While this was happening, you could see there was bad communication. There was even a question in the media at the time: who's the regulator? Who's regulating this business? And then the Ponzi scheme came crashing down. Fallout still in the courts till today. And then you have the great story. You have MTN mobile money. You have mobile money, the telecoms entering into the mobile money space. As you know, telecoms are not financial houses. But we saw this trend starting from Kenya, Tanzania. Mobile money became a big thing. It was one of the greatest of increasing financial inclusivity. So we saw a lot of engagement with stakeholders. Bank of Ghana was issuing guidelines to sort of, as and when, respond to the demands of the market and create a really safe space for that market, the mobile money to be operating. So I think those are two examples of how it works when you engage and deal with the regulators, and how it works if you're trying to skate.
Yeah, the Ms. Good saga is really an interesting example, because in that instance, there were so many advertisements by celebrities and all that. So it was very easy for the Bank of Ghana to step in and issue a warning to the public that these guys are not licensed by us to conduct the business that they are doing. But for secluded businesses in corners, with several corridors in Ghana, what are some of the common triggers for the regulators to be able to begin an investigative process?
Right. So it's interesting that you say, corners, and it's good we're doing this. So one of, let me say, the most common triggers really for regulator attention first would be consumer and whistleblower complaints.
Right.
And this happens more than people know. So you have a situation where consumers have a problem with the business that they're dealing with, the enterprise they're engaging with. They did an investment, the monies are not coming back, things are locked up. Those complaints could go to the Bank of Ghana. An investigation process will be started.
Okay.
Whistleblower complaints also occur. Sometimes people are struck when you realize that you're working in an organization and things are being done in an untoward manner. Those things also come up. So usually what we advise our clients to do is, look, when you have consumer complaints coming in, it helps if you have an internal investigative process. You listen to what the complaints is, and then you try to find a way to resolve it. These are some of the ways you can address, complaints and how things are triggered, because that is the main way of getting the regulators involved. Of course, there are the monitoring and reporting mechanisms that also help the regulators to come in when, suspicious things are happening.
Right. And what are typically the results of such investigative processes when they begin?
Well, regulators have wide powers depending on the laws or the regulator we're speaking of. On the very far end of the spectrum, you have the situations where the license could be revoked. And even beyond that, there can be civil claims brought against, you. And then even the directors who are in organizations that have been found insolvent or have declaratory obligations for the next business they want to get in. And if there were findings of fraud, dishonesty, you could even be disqualified from being a director of a company. And then on the other spectrum, we have fines and penalties.
Right. So are there any specific organizations or businesses which typically or usually undergo scrutiny by the regulators in the financial market?
Yes. So here we are talking about the regulated, institutions. We're talking about the banks, financial houses. We're talking about investment companies, fund managers. We're also talking about, fintechs, and now telecoms, the subsidiaries that run, the mobile money businesses. So these, usually the regulated entities are the ones in charge, but it's the areas in which they're operating. Now we have a lot of emerging markets in the financial space, especially payment systems, fintech. So those things catch the attention of the regulator.
Right. So let's say I'm a fintech company, and then I have gotten information that the regulator, that is the Bank of Ghana, is looking into me. What do I need to do?
Well, typically you typically get a letter from the regulator informing you that they want to have a discussion with you, or they want to, have a meeting with you. This is an issue. They don't always have to start that way. They can have their own investigations, take place before you get an invitation. Now, either way, when this happens, there has to be a great strategy. Some of the things we advise is you start with having a response team, gather the evidence, have everything backed by documents, right? And then also have your team, that is a legal team, look through everything and puts together a case present. You don't go for these meetings without your lawyers. It's a bad strategy.
Right. So for viewers watching at home, the main takeaway from this point is that you should consult your lawyers whenever you get information that you're under scrutiny. Okay, so let's continue. Assuming the regulator has looked into our affairs as a business, as a fintech, for example, and then they have mulched us with fines or some penalties, what can we do?
Well, there are generally two options. For most of the regulators, there's always an internal review or appellate process. So the Bank of Ghana, Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, you can appeal to these bodies to review the investigative process, to review the decision, and then either reverse it or sort of come up with another decision. But then at the same time, for all these regulatory bodies, they are subject to the supervisory powers of the High Court.
Okay.
So then you can go to the High Court for some supervisory orders to either quash or to set aside certain decisions. But I should say that generally, when the High Court is involved, it is not necessarily deciding how deciding for the regulator the decision to be made, but it is just ensuring that there was some kind of justice in the procedure and the process that led to the decision, right? So the better strategy is always to partner with the regulator and to sort of make sure that everything is kosher, as they say.
Right. So let's tease that part a bit. So apart from the courts ensuring that the process was fair, what are some of the other grounds that the courts would consider to exercise its supervisory powers over the regulator?
Yes. So obviously, because of the wide powers that regulators have, sometimes businesses, regulated entities need some protection under the law.
Right.
So this sometimes take the form like when you're doing investigations, you have to be informed that you're being investigated. And then also when you bring in documents, you have the opportunity to challenge maybe others to produce documents, their production. When a decision is being taken against you, you have the right to be heard. So some of these things are like the rights that you have in the process. It's more of ensuring that an adverse decision is not taken against your business without you having a say, or without you having the best possible means of presenting your case in as free and fair a manner as possible.
Right. I mean, we must all admit that given the position of the regulator in the market and the businesses or companies in the market, there's going to be some sort of information asymmetry where the businesses or the companies have more information which the regulator does not have access to. What is the consequence of that information asymmetry between the businesses and the regulator?
That's a great question. So the thing with information asymmetry is essentially that, especially in financial markets, you have a situation where there are a lot of new solutions, new services, payment systems, fintechs coming up with all these, wonderful innovations in how to provide these solutions and these services. So the technology creates a situation where there's a lot of advancement that maybe our laws and regulations haven't caught up. So we were already talking about something like the mobile money, and then other fintechs like payments systems like that came in later. So then the idea is to have that communication system where you can explain the technology, how it works, the risks, in a way that the regulators can work with you. So, I mean, the Bank of Ghana now has set up the sandbox, right, with their fintech department as one of the ways of ensuring that, look, you have this sort of incubator system where these new ideas and new models are working with the regulators to come out and provide services to help the economy grow.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So with the sandbox, can you give an explanation as to how it works?
I mean, it's basically, I think, one of the wonderful things that the Bank of Ghana has come up with. This is essentially a program where they're working with businesses, they're working with fintechs, they're working with anyone who has these, solutions that you're coming up with. You engage in this model where you're sharing information, sharing knowledge with the regulator, and then the regulator, understanding what's necessary, then can come out with, together with stakeholders, come out with like policies and that's serve, the industry, serve the markets, as opposed to sort of stifle growth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, being part of the regulatory sandbox would ensure transparency and also enhance the collaboration with the regulator. Is that not correct?
I agree with you. It's a wonderful idea.
Right. So what are your key takeaways from this discussion?
I think I would say, first off, always having a great communication strategy. Like we started with, the perspective you need to have in mind as a business is that, your regulators are people that could end up being your partners. You deal with them. But always you have to be careful as well. because they have wide powers.
All right.
They can give sanctions and things of the sort. So when dealing with your regulators, always make sure you have legal counsel. Always make sure you're properly advised. And then always make sure that your documentation, your strategy, everything is well in place. And, it's one of the things that can make your business, grow in leaps and bounds.
Thank you so much, Paa, for joining us today. I've learned a lot from this discussion. Viewers, it's been an insightful discussion with Paa on regulator engagement in financial markets. I'm sure you know that the regulator is not out to get you, but is there to help you. And as you collaborate with the regulator, you can build, together with the regulator, a successful business. Thank you so much.